The cook. The morning light slanted through the narrow window of the servants' hall, striking the stone floor in pale rectangles. The kitchen smelled of boiled oats, damp wood, and the faint lingering smoke from last night's fire. Margaret O'Doyle stirred the porridge pot with a steady rhythm of habit, her strong wrists turning the wooden spoon with a dull scrape. She had been awake since 4. The cook was always first to rise in the house of Lord Whitby. Once she had been second maid, then scullery and later housemaid, but as her figure filled out and her hair grew coarse with steam and sweat, she'd found herself relegated to the warmth of the kitchen permanently. "You've the arms for bread," Mrs. Pritchard the housekeeper had said years ago, and that was the end of it. Now, at 35, Margaret was solid, red-faced, and wide of hip, the sort of woman people described as sturdy until she turned her back, when fat rolled off their tongues more freely. She wiped her forehead with her sleeve and glanced toward the hearth where the baby's bottle sat in a pot of hot water. A thin wail from upstairs pierced the silence of dawn, the widower's infant, crying again. The sound echoed down the stairwell, lonely and high, like something searching for a mother who no longer answered. Margaret sighed. She had not been hired to tend the child. But since Mrs. Eliza Whitby had died in childbirth 3 months ago, no nurse had lasted more than a week. The housekeeper had tried to soothe the infant herself at first, but her joints were bad, and she could not manage the nightly cries. The maids avoided it altogether. The widower, Lord Henry Whitby, had retreated into his study, surrounded by silence and papers, seeing no one save his butler and solicitor. Margaret lifted the pot from the stove, testing the milk's warmth against her wrist. Satisfied, she poured it into the bottle and climbed the back stairs, her heavy shoes creaking on each worn step. The nursery was half dark, curtains drawn tight. A fire burned low in the grate. The child, a pale, squirming bundle in a cradle of carved oak, wailed weakly. Margaret crossed to him, her shadow falling over the tiny form. "There now, little sir," she murmured, lifting him with surprising gentleness. "Your papa's busy pretending not to hear you again." The baby's fists opened and closed as she held the bottle to his lips. He latched, sucking greedily, the sound loud in the hush of the room. Margaret rocked on her heels, humming under her breath, an old Irish lullaby her mother used to sing while folding laundry. Her thoughts drifted, as they often did, to her own lost child. It had been 12 years now, a boy who lived only 3 days. No one had spoken of him afterward. The man she'd loved, a groom in another household, had married elsewhere within the year. Margaret had buried the ache deep, beneath years of flour dust and hearth soot. But each time she cradled this nameless infant, the ache rose again, raw and stubborn. A soft knock startled her. She turned, and there, framed in the doorway, stood Lord Whitby himself. He was tall, lean, with a face carved by sleeplessness. His black hair had silvered at the temples, his cravat hung loose, and his eyes, grey as winter sea, were ringed with shadow. For a long moment he said nothing. Only watched the scene, the cook with the babe in her arms, the bottle tilted, the firelight flickering over both faces. "I heard him crying," he said finally. His voice was low, roughened by disuse. Margaret inclined her head. "Aye, my lord. He was hungry." "I see." His gaze drifted to the bottle. "The wet nurse left 2 nights ago." "She did," Margaret replied. "Said her own milk had run dry. Though I think it was the quiet that frightened her." Whitby's mouth twitched faintly, almost a smile, but not quite. "The house is quiet," he murmured. "Too quiet." She shifted the baby against her shoulder. "Children don't much care for quiet. Nor do the living." His eyes lifted to hers then, really seeing her, for perhaps the first time. He noticed the sweat at her brow, the strong arms cradling the child, the plain apron stretched over a generous waist. "You've children of your own?" he asked. She hesitated. "Had one, my lord. Long ago." He looked away. "Then you know." "Yes." The baby's cries had softened to small sighs. Margaret set him gently back in the cradle, covering him with a woolen blanket. Whitby remained at the doorway. "You've been doing this often, I'm told." "I suppose I have. Someone must." "And why?" His tone was not cruel, simply curious, as though he could not fathom why anyone would offer care freely. Margaret folded her hands before her apron. "Because no one else will. And because no one wants a fat girl, sir. But I can feed the baby." The words hung between them like smoke. Something in Whitby's face shifted, not pity, not quite. More like understanding, old and quiet. He nodded once. "Then stay." That morning marked the first change in the rhythm of the house. Margaret remained in the nursery after breakfast, washing the child's linens, airing the curtains, and humming as she worked. The maids whispered below stairs. wondering why the master had spoken to the cook at all, let alone in such a way. By evening, she had arranged the baby's cradle closer to the fire and mended a tear in the faded canopy. She even found a small carved rattle tucked in a drawer, Eliza's, perhaps, and placed it by the baby's side. When Whitby passed by that night, he paused at the door again. The child was sleeping soundly. Margaret sat knitting by the firelight. He spoke softly. "He sleeps better with you." She didn't look up. "All children sleep better near a heart that beats steady, my lord." Whitby lingered, then nodded and withdrew. Days turned into weeks. The November chill deepened, frost painting the windows each dawn. Whitby began taking his meals downstairs again, though often alone. Sometimes, after supper, he walked through the kitchen on his way to the cellar, always pretending to inspect something or ask after provisions, but Margaret knew better. He would linger, watching her knead bread or skim broth, listening to her hum. Once he asked, "What is that song?" "An old one," she said. "From back home." He nodded. "My wife sang too." Never the same tune twice. Silence fell again, but softer this time. One stormy night, the wind rattled the shutters and howled down the chimney. The baby woke crying, feverish and restless. Margaret sat beside him for hours, bathing his brow, whispering old prayers. At dawn, Whitby appeared, shirt undone, hair unkempt, the first time she had seen him so disordered. "Is he?" "Fever," she said quickly. "But not deep. He'll sweat it out." Whitby crouched beside her, his long fingers brushing the child's hand. For the first time, Margaret saw him not as a lord, but as a man frightened of losing what little remained of his world. When the baby's breathing steadied, Whitby sank back against the wall, closing his eyes. "I cannot do this," he whispered. "Every sound in this house reminds me she is gone." Margaret laid a hand on his sleeve, awkwardly, uncertain if it was her place. "Then let the sound of your son remind you she was here." He looked at her, eyes wet, but said nothing. By Christmas, the fever was gone. Snow blanketed the grounds, muffling the world outside. The household gathered for the evening meal, a rare thing that winter. The butler carved the roast goose, the maids exchanged shy smiles, and laughter even echoed faintly through the hall. Margaret sat nearest the hearth, hands folded over her lap. Whitby raised his glass briefly in her direction. No words, only that small gesture of acknowledgment. But to her, it was more than words. After supper, when the house slept, she crept to the nursery. The baby stirred once, then sighed and settled again. Margaret leaned over the cradle, brushing a curl from his brow. "Sleep, little one," she murmured. "You're safe now." Down the hall, Whitby stood unseen in the shadows, listening to her voice. For the first time in months, he felt something that was not grief. Something fragile. Perhaps, he thought, there was still life in the quiet. The master. Winter passed slowly, in a hush of frost and low fires. By February, the air had begun to soften, carrying the scent of thawing earth. In the great house at Whitby Downs, the rooms remained mostly shuttered, but something had changed within their walls. The cook sang now. Not loudly, never that, but quietly, under her breath, while tending to the kitchen garden or stirring the soup. The sound of her humming drifted through corridors that had long been silent. The maids began to chatter again. Even the butler, stiff as an oak post, found himself smiling at the warmth returning to the household. Lord Henry Whitby noticed it most of all. Each morning, when he descended from his study, he passed the nursery door and heard the cook's voice, soft and even, like the turning of a wheel. The child, William, cooed in response. And sometimes, the sound of both laughter and lullaby mingled, echoing faintly down the stairwell. One morning, Whitby paused at that door and knocked. "Come in, my lord," Margaret said without surprise. He stepped into the room. She sat in the rocking-chair, the baby in her lap, sunlight filtering through the curtains in pale bands across her face. Her sleeves were rolled up, flour dust still clung to her apron. "I've come to thank you," he said. She raised her brows. "Thank me, my lord, for saving him." Margaret looked down at the child, now plump and rosy. "He saved himself, sir. All he needed was a bit of milk and a steady arm." Whitby smiled faintly. "You're too modest." She gave a small laugh. "I'm too busy, more like." He looked around. The room smelled faintly of lavender and clean linen. A simple vase of snowdrops rested on the mantel. "You've made this place livable again," he said. Margaret's hands stilled. "Every child deserves a cheerful room." Grief has its place, my lord, but it shouldn't fill the nursery. Her words struck him with their quiet wisdom. He realized how long he had lived beneath grief's shadow, letting it shape his days into gray sameness. After that morning, he found reasons to visit the kitchen more often. Sometimes to ask after supplies. Sometimes to bring a book for the child. And sometimes, though he hardly admitted it to himself, for the comfort of another presence. Margaret always greeted him with the same steady calm. "Good morning, my lord," she'd say, wiping her hands on her apron. "You'll be wanting tea, I suppose." And he would watch her pour it, hands strong but graceful, eyes lowered in concentration. It was not beauty that drew him, at least, not the kind society prized. Her hair was threaded with early gray, her figure broad and work-hardened. Yet there was something luminous about her composure, something that made the kitchen feel less like a servant's domain and more like the heart of the house itself. Spring arrived, green and tender. The crocuses bloomed by the garden wall, and the baby learned to sit up, gurgling at the sound of the piano in the distant drawing-room. One afternoon, Margaret took him out into the garden, wrapped in a shawl. She sat on the bench beneath the pear tree, pointing out sparrows and clouds. She didn't notice the window above until she looked up, and saw Lord Whitby watching from his study. He did not move away when their eyes met. That evening, he came to the kitchen again, under the pretense of asking after preserves. "You took him outside," he said. "Aye," she replied, stirring the pot. "He ought to see the sun, my lord. The child's half made of shadow otherwise." Whitby smiled. "You're quite right." He hesitated, then added, "Would you join me in the drawing-room after supper? There's a matter I'd speak to you about." Margaret blinked. "Me, my lord?" "Yes." "Only a few minutes." The drawing-room was dim, the fire throwing soft light on books and faded curtains. Margaret stood just inside the doorway, hands clasped. Whitby gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please, sit." She obeyed, stiffly. The velvet creaked under her weight. He poured 2 cups of tea, handed one to her, and took the other himself. "You've served this house faithfully," he began. "But your duties have expanded. You've become both cook and nurse to my son. It seems only right your position reflect that." She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. "I've spoken to the housekeeper. You'll remain cook, but with a nurse's stipend as well. You'll have a maid under you for assistance. And, if you wish, the room adjoining the nursery can be made ready for you." Margaret stared at him. "My lord, I'm not asking for favor, I know," he said quietly. "But you've earned it. It's not charity. It's recognition." For a moment, she could not speak. Her life had been one of service, thankless and unnoticed. To be seen at all, to be valued, was almost more than she could bear. At last she said, "You're kind, sir." "No," he said softly. "Just grateful." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but something gentler, older. Weeks went by. The room beside the nursery was prepared for her, small but warm. She kept her place in the kitchen, but spent most evenings upstairs, reading softly to the baby while the rain pattered against the window-panes. Whitby began leaving his study door open, sometimes wandering the halls at night. Once, he found her asleep in the rocking-chair, the child nestled against her. The sight stirred something deep and unfamiliar, not desire exactly, but longing for a peace he had thought forever lost. He turned to leave, but she stirred awake. "My lord." He stopped. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to wake you." She rubbed her eyes, smiling faintly. "You didn't. The boy sleeps deep after a story." He hesitated. "You should rest properly. You're wearing yourself thin." She laughed quietly. "Thin, my lord? No one's accused me of that before." He smiled too, the first real smile she had ever seen from him. "Then perhaps I should have said weary. I'm used to weary." "Yes," he murmured, "but you shouldn't have to be." Summer brought warmth, and with it life. The garden burst into bloom. The baby took his first steps. Margaret clapped and cheered while the maids looked on, delighted. Whitby watched from the terrace, sunlight glinting in his hair. When the child stumbled, he caught him easily, laughter breaking through the years of silence. Margaret froze, seeing him laugh. It changed his whole face, made him seem 10 years younger. Later, when she brought the boy in for his nap, Whitby stopped her at the stairs. "I owe you more than I can say," he told her. "You owe me nothing, my lord. I owe you everything." She looked away. "Don't say that. It's not fitting." "Fitting," he repeated softly. "What does fitting matter, when it's true?" She could not answer. Her heart beat hard against her ribs. By autumn, the whispers had begun. Servants gossiping in corners, tradesmen noting how often the master lingered in the kitchen. Mrs. Pritchard, the housekeeper, hinted delicately that such closeness might invite talk. Margaret knew she was right. Yet each evening, when Whitby came to sit by the nursery fire, reading softly while she mended the baby's clothes, neither could find the strength to step back. One night, as rain lashed the windows and thunder rolled over the hills, Whitby closed his book and said, "Do you ever regret staying?" She looked up from her sewing. "No, my lord. There's comfort in caring for something small. It makes the world less cruel. And for yourself?" She smiled faintly. "I've never expected much of the world." He leaned forward. "Then the world has cheated you?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I've had warmth, work, and purpose. And now, this little one. That's enough for anyone." Whitby stared at her hands, rough and steady, and thought of how they had brought life back into his house. "It isn't enough for me," he said at last. Margaret froze. "My lord." He stood, pacing toward the window. "I know how it must sound. You've every right to scorn me. But these months, they've shown me something I'd forgotten. Kindness. Peace. I thought love was buried with Eliza. Yet, when I look at you, I remember how to breathe again." The fire popped. Outside, wind tore at the trees. Margaret rose slowly, trembling. "You're lonely, my lord. That's all. You mistake gratitude for affection." "Do I?" he whispered. Her throat tightened. "I'm your cook." He turned, eyes bright with quiet defiance. "And I am a man." For a moment, neither spoke. Then the baby stirred, breaking the spell. Margaret turned away, gathering him up. "Good night, my lord," she said softly. Whitby stood in silence as she left, the door closing between them with the gentlest click. Winter came again. Snow fell thick over Whitby Downs. The house was warm, the child walking now, laughing through the halls, scattering the last traces of sorrow. One evening near Christmas, Whitby found Margaret alone in the kitchen, kneading dough. He watched her a long time before speaking. "Do you ever wish for more?" he asked quietly. She did not look up. "More what, my lord?" "More life. Beyond this house." She smiled sadly. "I had my chance once. The world didn't choose me. But here, I'm needed." Whitby stepped closer. "So am I." Margaret stilled. "Please, sir." He sighed, leaning against the table. "You think I don't know what they say? Let them. I care nothing for gossip. You've given this house back its soul. And he broke off, shaking his head. "Forgive me. I forget myself." She wiped her hands on her apron. "No, my lord. You remember yourself. That's the difference." They stood in silence. Then the baby's laugh echoed down the hall, high and pure. Margaret smiled faintly. "He's waiting." Whitby nodded. "Then let us not keep him." Years later, people would say the widower never remarried. Yet he was never alone. The cook remained, first as nurse, then as housekeeper, and finally as companion to both father and child. The house grew full again, of laughter, of warmth, of bread baking in the oven. The baby became a boy, then a man. And when he spoke of his childhood, he said there were two steady hearts that raised him, one born of love, the other of duty, until the two became the same. On the final page of the household ledger, in handwriting not Whitby's own, someone had written, "No one wanted the fat girl, sir. But she fed the baby, and in doing so, she fed the world around her."